Okay, dear colleagues, can I now ask you to take your seats? Thank you for being here, dear members and dear guests. Today we mark 1,000 days since Russia's unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine. To begin, I would like to invite you all to watch a short video showing how this European Parliament has stood with Ukraine for 1,000 days, and we will continue to do so for as long as it takes.
From day one of Russia's full-scale invasion, the European Parliament has continued to stand with Ukraine and its people. Parliament's support to Ukraine remained unwavering to help the country recover, resist and rebuild. As Europeans opened their hearts and homes to Ukrainians, it supported aid for those fleeing and for communities back home. Parliament has led the way on ever tougher sanctions against the aggressors and demanded justice. Russia's aggression is an attack not just on Ukraine, but on our European values of democracy, freedom and the rule of law. Ukraine's security is Europe's security. That's why Parliament is leading the way for EU membership for a sovereign, democratic Ukraine and stands with those who oppose autocrats around the world. Parliament will support Ukraine's fight for freedom for as long as it takes.
Long live freedom, long live Europe, Slava Ukraini. Now it is an honor to welcome the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, joining us live.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Today we mark 1,000 days since Russia unleashed its brutal invasion of Ukraine. 1,000 days of terror, suffering and unimaginable loss. 1,000 days of courage, resilience and unbreakable spirit. For 1,000 days, the people of Ukraine and you, President Zelenskyy, have shown the world what true bravery looks like. You have stood up, refusing to break. Your people are an inspiration to all who value freedom around the world. And for 1,000 days, this European Parliament has stood shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine and their representatives in the Verkhovna Rada, united and unwavering. And we will continue to stand with Ukraine today, tomorrow and every day for as long as it takes. This is an assault not only on Ukraine but on the rules-based order, an assault on our values and on our way of life. Peace, democracy and freedom, this is what is at stake here. And we know the sacrifice the Ukrainian people are enduring, not just for themselves, but for all of us. I will forever be proud that this Parliament has led the charge in supporting Ukraine with political, financial, humanitarian and military assistance, and we will always stand for peace, a real peace based on justice, dignity, and the principle of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. This is why we have imposed tough sanctions on Russia, and we call to go even further to hit Russia's war machine. This is why we were the first to call for Ukraine's rightful place inside our European Union. And this is why we were there on the ground in Kiev just a couple of weeks after the invasion began. Today, we send a clear, simple message. We stand with Ukraine until freedom, until real peace. For as long as it takes, Slava Ukraini. Now I give to you, dear President, dear Volodymyr, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, dear Roberta, Madam President, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, our friends of Ukraine. I thank you for supporting Ukraine. Thank you, Roberta, for calling this extraordinary session of the European Parliament to mark 1,000 days of full-scale war. Thank you for ensuring that not a single one of the 1,000 days of this terrible war became a day of betrayal of our shared European values. We've proven that these values are not just words, not something abstract. European values and the European way of life, when transformed into action, protect the lives of real people. Thank you so much. Together, Ukraine, all of Europe, and our partners in America and around the world, we have succeeded not only in preventing Putin from taking Ukraine, but also in defending the freedom of all European nations. Even with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, but by his side, Putin remains smaller than the united strength of Europe. I urge you not to forget this, and do not forget how much Europe is capable of achieving. And if we could stop Europe's way of life from falling, then we can surely push Russia towards a just peace. Peace is what we desire most. 2 years ago, we proposed the peace formula, and I'm grateful to all of Europe and every partner who has supported it. And you in the European Parliament were among the first to support the peace formula. And the only one who opposes it, it's the one who started this war. It's Russia. And we must push Russia toward just peace. Every blow and every threat from Russia must be met with a firm sanctions. For 1,000 days, it has been crucial to radically reduce Russia's ability to fund its war through oil sales. Oil is the lifeblood of Putin's regime, and the shadow fleet of tankers is what keeps it alive. As long as these tankers operate, Putin continues to kill. Strong sanctions are essential. I thank each of you, thank you, Roberta, again, and thank each of you who supports our people, our resilience, our ability to restore safety even after the most devastating mass attacks by Russia. Together we have accomplished much, but we must not fear doing even more. Now, Putin has brought 11,000 North Korean troops to Ukraine's borders. This contingent may grow to 100,000. While some European leaders think about, some elections or something like this at Ukraine's expense, Putin is focused on winning this war. He will not stop on his own. the more time he has, the worse the conditions become. Every today is the best moment to push Russia harder, and it's clear without certain key factors, Russia will lack real motivation to engage in meaningful negotiations. Without fires in its ammunition depots on Russian territory, without disrupted military logistics, without destroyed Russian air bases, without its lost capabilities to produce missiles and drones, and without its assets being confiscated. You know very well that Putin does not value people or rules. He values only money and power. These are the things we must take away from him to restore peace. If anyone in Europe thinks they can sell Moscow, Ukraine, or any other country like the Baltic states or the Balkans, Georgia, Moldova, and gain something in return, let them remember this simple truth. No one can enjoy calm waters amid a storm. And we must do everything to end this war fairly and justly, as you said, Roberta. And of course, together. 1,000 days of war is a tremendous challenge. Ukraine deserves to make the next year the year of peace. Thank you again. Thank you so much. Thank you for your resolutions, your decisions, your principles, your visits to Ukraine during the war, during first year of the war, especially first year when it was so difficult. And thanks and your faith in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much, President Zelenskyy. Now I give the floor to Manfred Weber from the EPP Group.
Madam President, dear Commissioners, Mr. President Zelenskyy, Ukrainian people, first of all, I want to thank our President because Roberta Metsola was the first European leader representing one of the European institutions to travel to Ukraine, to Kiev, after the war started. And Roberta, thank you so much for this kind of leadership. You made us as an institution proud of doing so. And also today's discussion, today's debate with President Zelenskyy's presence 1,000 days after Putin's war. Yes, we mourn the thousands of soldiers and civilians, including 600 children. Our first thoughts today go to all those who lost family members and friends and neighbors. The loss of any life is a tragedy. Putin's war is brutal terror. That's the first what we have to recognize. But there is a second reality behind the 1,000 days. Let's be honest, not so many observers thought that Ukraine would have resisted. Not so many experts thought that the Ukrainian forces would be able to regain occupied territory. Not so many observers thought that Ukraine would show a true European face. And yet, yes, you did it. Today, the Ukrainian people have all the right to say, we are Europeans, or, Mr. President, as you said several times, the Ukrainians live, believe in and defend the essence of what makes us Europeans, and that's the European way of life. Congratulations and thank you so much. What do we have to do now? First, we have to talk with our American friends. The war in Ukraine is not a simple regional dispute. The war in Ukraine is a battle line between the free world and brutal dictatorship. Drones produced in Iran North Korean soldiers fighting against Europeans on European soil. What else do you need as a proof for this geopolitical reality? Second, Europe must prepare to take on more responsibility. We will do what is necessary to give you, Ukrainians, the financial stability you need, whatever it takes, as Roberta said it. Every euro invested in Ukraine is cheaper than, for example, funding more refugees coming to Europe. Thirdly, Ukraine must win on the battleground. Joe Biden shows leadership, allowing Ukrainian forces to use all the weapons they have, also on Russian territory. With this kind of leadership, it is up to the Europeans to do now the same. Chancellor Scholz said that he would take all the steps necessary together with our American friends. That's why please give now Ukraine the necessary Taurus missiles they need. Fourthly, Ukraine will be a member of the European Union soon. I want to thank the European government and the Parliament for all the reforms they have already implemented. You want to become a modern, a free and a democratic country. There is still a lot to do, but the efforts are clear. And we, as European People's Party, support you on this. And the fifth point, dear colleagues, what we have to do? Russia will not change. Russia will continue to be an imperialistic power, a security threat to all Europeans. That's why we need a long-lasting security architecture. And for us as EPP, it's clear, Ukraine must become member of the NATO. All other security guarantees haven't brought peace. And together with today's strongest army in Europe, that are the Ukrainian forces, we can build up a European pillar of defense to protect the European eastern border on the long term. The only way, dear friends, is peace through strength, not concessions. We will not allow Putin to steal Ukraine's European future. We stand with Ukraine, and yes, we will win.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. And now I give this floor to the chair of the S&D Group, Irache Garcia Perez.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam President. President Zelenskyy, welcome to the European Parliament. Thank you for being with us today at this time which is so difficult for Ukraine. Despite the distance, it's a pleasure and an honour to have you here with us in this shared house, the House of European Democracy. Today marks 1,000 days since the large-scale invasion of Russia against Ukraine, but there is also 4,000 days since the aggression began in 2014. Mr. Zelenskyy, this year we commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Hidnist, or Dignity Revolution. We're aware of the terrible price that you're still paying to defend this revolution. Mr. Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy, Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people don't need applause, nor do they need kind words about their courage and resistance. We're well aware of that. Ukraine needs arms because wars are not won by the power of the word. Wars are won with munitions, with tanks, with fighter jets and air defence. We need to be honest. If tomorrow the European Union was attacked by Putin, would we ask ourselves whether it's legitimate to attack back in the same way that they're attacking us? Would we ask ourselves if it's legal to use frozen assets of the aggressor to arm ourselves and to rebuild? With every red line that we've set in front of ourselves, the Ukrainian people pays for it in human lives and destruction. President Zelenskyy, you have been able to wake up the European memory. You reminded us of the worst mistakes of the 20th century, from the bombing in Guernica to the Berlin Wall, from the Holocaust to others. Now we have the Bucha massacre, the siege of Mariupol, or the Battle of Kharkiv. They show us that the worst nightmares of the past century have returned to the 21st century. And indifference is the enemy of wars. Indifference of those who think that the tragedy doesn't affect them. Our support to Ukraine is not only a moral obligation, moral commitment to international law and fair peace. There is no better guarantee for the security of Europe than victory for Ukraine. Because if Ukraine falls, the nationalist authoritarian criminal regime of Putin would not stop there. It's not just a question of supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. We need to support Ukraine with everything that it takes. We need to overcome the defeatist message that Ukraine cannot win the war. Russia has lost many wars in its history. In the past, there have been major powers who have lost. Mr. Zelenskyy, I want to reaffirm what I said in the first plenary session of this legislature. It may take weeks, it may take months, it may take years, it may cost blood, sweat or tears, but the Ukrainian people will win the war, because history has shown us that there's always two battles in any war. One is a battle of ideas, and Ukraine has already won this battle of ideas. Ukrainian people has chosen for democracy against those who reject it. Ukraine has chosen for freedom and openness against those who fear it. Ukraine has chosen for independence against those who dream of old empires. The other battle is on the battlefield. We have always said that you are fighting for our freedom. We have an obligation to provide Ukraine with all the political, military, financial and humanitarian support that it requires until victory. Zelenskyy, I was born in Spain, which was where a cruel dictator held the future and the present of the Spanish people hostage. For me, the European project was a representation of freedom, economic progress and social justice. I wanted to be in the European Union, as you said yourself 10 years ago in Maidan, and that's the same way that I want to be part of the EU today. We will support you until your aspiration to be a free country and a sovereign country are achieved, when you're able to decide on your own future as part of the European family. We will be at your side until the blue and yellow of the Ukrainian flags flies alongside the blue and yellow of the EU flags.
Ukraine. Now I give the floor to Kinga Gál on behalf of the EFA Group.
Mr. President, Madam President, colleagues, the devastating war in Ukraine has been going on for 1,000 days and there is no end in sight. Our position has been clear since the beginning of the war. We condemn Russia's military aggression, the violence, which is not only a grave violation under international law, but it is also morally unjustifiable. We sympathize with the Ukrainian people. We recognize the country's right to self-defense, and we stand up for Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. Hungary, like the Union as a whole, is doing its utmost to help Ukraine. Our country is carrying out and has carried out the largest humanitarian aid operation in its history. Since the outbreak of the war, tens of thousands of refugees have been arriving in our country every day, and in total we have received more than 1.4 million Ukrainian asylum seekers. Refugees in Hungary are provided with housing, healthcare and mother tongue education for children. We will continue to do our utmost to help the Ukrainian people. The protracted fighting has caused irreparable damage. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed and wounded, families torn apart and left stranded. As a mother of 4 boys, I have deep empathy with the mothers, and that is the only way I can see the terrible destruction of the last 1,000 days. It is an incomprehensible human tragedy and suffering. The longer the war goes on, the more victims there will be, the more difficult it will be to provide human resources for Ukraine. Our grief is increased by the fact that more and more Hungarians from Transcarpathia, including members of the Hungarian minority in Ukraine, are being killed on the front. The war is taking place in our neighborhood, so an escalation of the conflict would have drastic consequences for us. We, therefore, do not participate in arms shipments to Ukraine, and we oppose proposals that could lead to escalation. We must face up to the fact that the EU strategy for Ukraine to date has not lived up to expectations and has not brought an end to the war. I believe that in an armed conflict, saving lives, helping those who are suffering is the most important thing. This requires a ceasefire and peace negotiations as soon as possible, as this is the only way to end the destruction. It is good that more and more people are talking about the importance of a diplomatic solution. With the election of Donald Trump, we have a better chance to achieve this than ever before. And if we can end the war, we will need a comprehensive strategy for the reconstruction of Ukraine, and we will have to specify the EU's role within that. The focus now must be on peace building above all.
Now I give the floor on behalf of the ECR Group to its chair, Nicola Procaccini.
Thank you, President. 1,000 days ago, what was disguised as a mere Russian military exercise on the border with Ukraine turned out to be a full-scale invasion. The first in Europe after years of peace. A failed invasion, this very moment of commemoration reminds us. Failed thanks to the strenuous defense of Ukrainian men and women. Failed thanks to the courage and determination of the Ukrainian president. He was surrendered, threatened, mocked by internet trolls, but he did not flee, neither to a remote dacha in the forest, nor to a Manhattan hotel. He stood where he belonged, with his family, carrying out his duty. The Putin regime was convinced that it would only take one night to take over Ukraine. It did not. Since that day, the Ukrainian people have been enduring under the weight of indiscriminate shelling, targeting civilians, critical infrastructure and everything essential for survival. Since that day, Ukrainian children have been going to school underground. For 1,000 days, Ukraine has been forced to fight and die in order to continue to exist. What are the Ukrainian people teaching us? 3 things above all. That homeland is not a word that belongs to the past, but is still what holds the meaning of men and women in history. It teaches us that freedom is not a political slogan, but a necessity of the soul. Finally, it teaches us that Europe is not a treaty signed in the last century. It is not a set of sometimes unjust rules, a collection of bureaucrats and offices, but is a community of destiny to which we belong without having to choose it. In a few hours, there will be another anniversary. On the evening of 21st November 2013, some young people took the main square of Kiev. They were beaten and killed. They became thousands and gave rise to a popular revolution called Euromaidan. None of us, Western Europeans, can imagine a generation of high school kids and young workers defying death by coloring their faces in the blue and stars of Europe. But in Ukraine, it happened. They died wrapped in the bloody flags of the European Union, the flag that for us is not much more than an office object. And they died like that under the bells of St. Michael's Monastery, while someone played Chopin on a piano set up on a pile of snow soaked in the blood. That is why we will continue to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And not only because it represents the right side of history, but because we know that not defending the principles of freedom and human dignity today would mean accepting a future of chaos in which the law of force prevails over right and the weakest are destined to succumb. Those watching this war in China, in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America are waiting to know whether the entire West still believes in its founding values. Among them, the value of peace, which is not an unescapable condition, unfortunately, but is a treasure to be protected with courage and sacrifice. Winston Churchill wisely said, accepting peace on hard terms is like feeding a crocodile, hoping it will eat us last. Let us do what is right for as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to the chair of the Renew Europe Group, Valérie Hayet.
Madame la Présidente, merci.
Madam President, President Zelenskyy, it's an enormous honor to have you here among us. It's been 1,000 days of war, 1,000 days that your people have been resisting and fighting for freedom. There is an aggressor and a victim in this war. There is a leader that for 10 years has been attacking your territory. And Ukrainians are brave, and because of this, he has had to resort to others for his murderous campaign, North Korea and others. There is one sole aggressor who has brought war to European soil. Every day the troops are attacked, and so are your people, but your people are standing strong and they are extremely courageous with Europe by your side. Some in the European Parliament say they're pacifists, but let us call a spade a spade. They are the allies of Vladimir Putin. And when they talk about peace, it is basically about the law of the mightiest. So who started this war? Who is conducting an expansionist policy? Who has the international court on its pursuing it? Standing by Ukraine is also about protecting the security of Europe, but it's also about defending ourselves. We have to consolidate the European defense market, joint procurement for defense, so that we can keep a threat at bay. This is a crossroads. President Zelenskyy, you have been defending yourselves for 1,000 days, and we stand by your side. We have supported Ukraine in a humanitarian way, economically, sanctions in an unprecedented way. We have stood united for 1,000 days, despite the fact that the Kremlin expected divisions. We don't know what will happen in the US. There's a lot of uncertainty, but Europe cannot get used to this war at our doorstep. 1,000 days, and we will continue because there's a majority in this European Parliament that's been elected to stand by your side for as long as it takes, because EU unity is more efficient than piecemeal attempts. 1,000 days have showed us that the Russian regime was capable of the worst, and that we can only move forward if we fight against autocrats. We need military support, colleagues, with air defense systems, missiles, drones, vehicles, and we also need financial support with the EU loans and the G7, and it is the frozen assets, the Russian frozen assets, that will pay for this. We have to, it is legitimate to strike areas in Russia. We have to urgently deal with the breaches that exist in third countries and the shadow fleet. Yes, Vladimir Putin and his henchmen have to be punished for their crimes and taken before international justice. Your victory plan, President Zelenskyy, is a sound one. It is the right one, because we want a just and lasting peace. But nothing can happen without you. Everything has to happen with you, because it is the fate of your people that is at stake, and it is linked to ours. Through the EU and NATO, Ukraine will be European. With our shared family, Renew Europe, President Zelenskyy, and with most colleagues here and the peoples of Europe, I'm saying to you, we will stand by your side for as long as it takes. Slava Ukraini.
And now I give the floor to the co-chair of the Green Group, Terry Reintke.
Thank you, President. Dear President of Ukraine, Zelenskyy, dear colleagues, and most of all, dear friends in Ukraine. It has been 1,000 days since Putin's illegal and unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which brought utter destruction and unbearable suffering to the people of Ukraine. 1,000 days, a sad milestone, and at the same moment, a reminder of our promise. We stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. As long as it takes until peace finally becomes reality for Ukraine again. And trust me, it's us who are longing for peace. But the people who are longing for peace the most are the people in Ukraine. A peace on Ukraine's terms, which allows the Ukrainian people to live in freedom and safety and not under the oppression of Russia's brutal colonial shackles. Warmonger Putin will not stop this terror. He will send more soldiers to their death. He will use more weapons to bomb infrastructure, hospitals and schools. He will use the cold winter to try to freeze the Ukrainians into submission. Putin does not obey international law. He's actually trying to move back to a time where Europe was ruled by empires, starting by building a Russian empire, threatening all those who want to live in peace and freedom in Europe. It's a weak man's big phantom pain of Russian Tsars and Soviet rulers. Putin only recognizes the right of the strongest, so we have to show him Europe's united strength. The re-election of President Trump into the White House is another wake-up call for the European Union in this regard. We must move forward with renewed vigor. We have to step up our military support for Ukraine. Ukraine urgently needs credible security guarantees. And also, the EU has to be able to defend itself and must become independent from dictators in terms of energy supply. We have paid a very high price on this continent because of our own short-sightedness in this regard. This is not just in our interest, but also in that of Ukraine. I'm speaking to our Ukrainian sisters and brothers who are still suffering and who are not only defending their own freedom, but also our freedom here in Europe. It might have been 1,000 days, but be reassured, Europe will not let you down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reintke. And now I give the floor to the co-chair of the Left Group, Martin Schildermann.
Thank you very much, Madam President. President Zelenskyy, for 1,000 days now, we've heard these noises of war, and more than 10,000 civilians have been killed by the Russian killing machine. And my empathy and sympathy goes out to all of those who are suffering. The old people, children, they're all suffering. And there are some who've come to Europe and have enjoyed humanitarian support, and those who are now questioning providing refuge for these people in this House should be ashamed of yourself. There are thousands of people who've been killed, Ukrainians who are rightly defending their own country, Russians, and this is part of the truth, who didn't want this war, are under an imperial leader and who've been dragged into this terrible death. This is a war that has to be brought to a close as soon as possible. President Zelenskyy, our objective is to have a justice and lasting peace, a peace based on international law, which respects the sovereignty of Ukraine. Russian soldiers have no role in Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine must sit around that table when that peace is negotiated. All stakeholders need to be involved, and that needs to be respected by the newly elected president of the US and Mr. Putin as well. The international order cannot be called into question because international law knows no double standards. It is not the law of might is right. That must not prevail. autocrats and imperial states cannot be allowed to question the integral territory of other countries and bring disaster upon these other countries. So we need to move around military terminology, move to diplomatic terminology. We need to strengthen the political pressure brought to bear of the international community on Russia, and the Commission, European Commission and the European governments need to do more. The US and China need to do more. We need to bring about an increase in pressure as well by having more efficient sanctions against Putin's war apparatus, against the military complex, against the shadow fleet, with the help of which he's circumventing the sanctions. The reconstruction of critical and civilian infrastructure for people in Ukraine has to begin now. And an international step in the right direction would be constituted by support from the President. Of course, we don't want big multinational companies to be earning money hand over fist by way of these reconstruction contracts. It is up to the Ukrainians themselves to rebuild their country. Thank you.
Mr. Shirdewan, so I thank you all, dear members. In the darkest of nights, Ukraine has shone as a beacon of courage, resilience and hope for all of us. This week, as a symbol of our bond, the flags of Ukraine and the European Union fly together across Brussels, Strasbourg and Luxembourg, and the European Parliament is illuminated with the radiant blue and yellow of Ukraine, a vivid reminder that Ukraine's struggle is our struggle too. So we stand with Ukraine, united, steadfast and unwavering for as long as it takes. Thank you very much. Now the next part session will take place from the 25th to the 28th of November. This session is adjourned and the sitting is closed.